Hello, this is Dr. Hart, and this is the Bill of Rights, Government, Politics, and Political Science. What you will learn in this presentation. You will learn what government is, what politics is, what power is, what political science is, what the first government of the United States was, and why the first government of the United States failed. So, what is government? It's a system of formal and informal arrangements for governing human beings. Institutions of government are those formal and informal organizations and laws and everything that has the force of law that govern human beings. Government is also a prize in political struggles. What is politics? The great American political scientist Harold Laswell described politics as who gets what, when, and how. And I simply define politics as a struggle for power. Power is the ability to do or not to do something, or to get others to do or refrain from doing something. Here you see a mind map of political science. I'm trying to answer the question, what is political science? Political science is one of many social sciences. On this map you can see two great branches. One going left, and it's about natural sciences, and one going right, and that's social sciences. Natural sciences include, but are not limited to, sciences like physics, chemistry, and biology. And natural sciences study nature. Social sciences study society. Social sciences include anthropology, history, sociology, and even some areas of psychology. And of course, political science. Political science very much is like the mixed martial arts of social sciences. It absorbs and uses different other social sciences for its own purposes in order to construct a coherent understanding of power, because political science is, after all, the study of power. Political science is a discipline that has a number of fields, and those fields in turn have many subfields. So let's look at the main fields of political science. One is methodology. Methodology is about the techniques, usually mathematical techniques, although not necessarily. Sometimes you have qualitative techniques in political science, and in this course we'll be looking at things almost entirely in a qualitative way. But methodology has been in recent decades, because of the rise of modern computers, heavily centered on quantitative methods. These include statistics, calculus, and especially what goes beyond calculus, which is mathematical analysis. So about 2 years of training in statistics and 2 years of training in calculus would be the minimum necessary to probably begin to understand the articles that are written in the flagship political science journal called American Political Science Review. And sometimes even graduate training in mathematics and in fields like linear algebra, and abstract algebra might be necessary to understand some of those articles. So that's methodology. And of course, this type of approach, a heavily mathematical approach, which includes abstract mathematics and actual quantitative data, is not unique to political science. Many social sciences have absorbed this approach. There's also comparative politics. In parentheses, I have area studies. Most people who engage in the study of comparative politics have a geographical area of emphasis, sometimes just one country in which they specialize. This is not necessarily so. There are some comparativists, as we call them, people who study comparative politics. Some of these comparativists utilize statistical methods and do not have an expertise in a particular region of the world. However, the majority of comparativists do. They need to be able to speak a foreign language, probably at least close to native fluency, and travel to the region on a regular basis and understand how the society and politics is structured, follow how that area is structured politically, socially, and economically. International relations deals with relations between countries, and it also includes the role played by other actors in the world, like non-governmental organizations, let's say Amnesty International, or intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations. International relations itself is a varied discipline. It also includes a variety of quantitative and qualitative methods. A number of main subfields in international relations is international political economy, also international law, and some others. Then there's American politics. American politics too utilizes quantitative and qualitative methods. American politics is a grand umbrella that covers a whole series of subfields. And scholars there are some who are American politics generalists, but many have a subfield specialization, like maybe interest groups, political parties, campaigns and elections. All of these are subfields of American politics, and scholars who publish in one subfield usually stay with that subfield. Legislative process is another one, presidency is yet another one. And so, as an example, a scholar who publishes in the field of presidency would probably publish little or nothing at all in other areas. He or she would just concentrate doing research in that one particular subfield of American politics. Then there is public law and policy. And if you're taking this course as a Bill of Rights course, then this is what we're going to emphasize, public law. Now, depending on which school you go to, sometimes it's called public law, sometimes it's also called public law and policy, and that's why I put the words and policy in parentheses. The idea here is that even as courts decide what the law is and make their decisions, they make policy as a result. They may not be making the law, strictly speaking, but as a result of their decision, they actually are shaping public policy. Then there's a separate area of public policy that deals with what government actually produces, the outcomes or outputs of government. Public policy may involve anything from energy policy to education policy to high-tech policy to social policy, etc. And then there's public administration, and this has to do with how bureaucracy is organized, how it functions. Public administration, therefore, is very heavily concentrated on the activities of the executive branch, particularly on the activities of unelected bureaucracy. So this is a quick rundown of different subfields of political science. How successful has political science been since it emerged as a separate discipline approximately 112 years ago, I think. 1908 is when the American Political Science Association was founded. So American politics and political science in general is actually a relatively new discipline. It does draw sometimes on ancient thought, like political philosophy from the ancient world and medieval world and the Renaissance. Nevertheless, as a separate discipline, distinct from philosophy, primarily distinct from philosophy, which used to contain it. It's a relatively young discipline, and how successful it has been depends on who you ask. I have held the following position for the last quarter century, since I started graduate school at USC 25 years ago. My belief is that political science has not been spectacularly successful, and that strictly speaking, it's not a science because it fails to make accurate predictions. While it can provide some insightful explanations, hindsight is easier than predictions. And if you have a discipline that doesn't generate accurate predictions, then chances are that it's not really a science and it doesn't have scientific theories. Strictly speaking, it has approaches, perspectives, etc. I will link to a video that explains in a greater detail what science is and how the scientific method proceeds from observations to hypothesis testing to establishing scientific theories. Political science also, as I mentioned, in recent decades has been very quantitative, and the abstract, the arcane nature of mathematics that often requires graduate training in math has turned off a number of people. The bottom line is, I think that politically savvy journalists produce better work in political science than actual political scientists. It's my opinion that While political science is occasionally insightful, uh, the best work for understanding politics is probably produced by politically savvy journalists. Now, other disciplines in the social sciences have kind of a similar dilemma in the history. Take that as an example, in that history explains what happened before, but it cannot generate very accurate predictions for the future. So that's sort of as a quick rundown of social sciences and political science in particular. What was the first government of the United States? Well, the first article of the United States was the Articles of Confederation. The articles were written in 1777 and approved in 1781. The Articles of Confederation were written during the height of the American Revolutionary War, which lasted from 1775 to 1783. In 1783, the British officially recognized the United States as an independent country at the Treaty of Paris. However, already 2 years earlier, in 1781, the British had stopped fighting after General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown to General Washington. The shooting war was over, and it took 2 more years for the diplomacy to work itself out and for the British to recognize the United States as its own country. So the Articles of Confederation was a government of a battle-born country. It was a wartime government. And the government that was established was actually a weak one. It was very much like what the NATO is today, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO is an organization for meeting the security needs of a number of Western countries. And the Articles of Confederation were organized around the same idea for the states that would become for the states that would become states after they were colonies. They would become states under the Articles of Confederation, for them to be able to provide for mutual resistance to the British. But once the war was over, it became clear that this type of arrangement was problematic. The government was simply too weak. For example, it could ask for money and soldiers from the states, but it could not really force the states to contribute these. And as several crises emerged, like the oyster conflict between several states, the conflict over rights for oysters, and as rebellions developed because of economic problems like Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, which was paralleled in a number of other states, it became clear that the central government was too weak for what it should be doing. And the Articles of Confederation were also problematic because in order to make any changes to the Articles, let's say you wanted to improve the Articles, right? To make any changes, you needed the consent of all 13 states. So why did the government fail? First, it's the aforementioned weakness of the arrangement. But second, because of determined elites whose aspirations and plans could be better fulfilled under a new system of government. Some people began to talk about replacing the Articles of Confederation with a whole new document, which is what happened in Philadelphia in 1787 when a new constitution was drawn up, contrary to the purpose for which the states had actually sent delegates to that convention. They sent them to make changes to the Articles of Confederation, but the convention actually didn't do that. It proposed a whole new document. So what did these elites want? They wanted a stronger central government which would be able to develop commerce, develop finance, and eventually establish the country along a more unified political system, and then later, according to Hamiltonian vision, industrial nation. So merchant elites, financial elites, they were not unified in this idea of creating a new constitution, but they tended to be on the side of this new constitution. whereas most Americans were actually okay with the Articles of Confederation because they lived in small towns and rural areas, and their local governments suited them just fine. They did not. The majority did not want the new constitution, but as generally happens in politics, the elites got their way and we got a new constitution. And of course, every time you establish a new government, there will be a question, what about rights? What rights will people have under this new government? And if you are creating a stronger central government than the one that already exists, how much danger does it really pose to the liberties that people have been taken for granted? Will their liberties be infringed upon? So these are important questions which will be addressed in future presentations.